I'm Professor Matthew Rotella, and in this tutorial I'm going to be going over using the Maya Spotlight. I'm going to be rendering in Arnold, and going along with that, I'm going to be making, or I'm going to be using light filters, and I'm going to set up some volumetric lighting. So, let's get started. To create a spotlight, it's pretty straightforward. You go up to Create, Lights, and then Spotlight, and it will make one. Right there at the origin. And a nifty thing about spotlights, which you can do this with all lights, but it's a little bit more nifty with spotlights in particular, is look through selected, and then I can tumble the same way I would any camera, and then whenever I get my subject in sight, and it's within this circle here, I then well, whatever's in the circle is what will be lit. So now I'll go back to panels, perspective, and I got a camera set up here, and by default this is going to be a little too dark, so there's the intensity at the top, of course, but if you're rendering in Arnold, the thing that will do you better is coming down here into the Arnold section, which is where you'll find your exposure. That way you won't have to put in a number like 1,000 or something. I'm just going to put 12 into the exposure. I think that should more or less function. Let me see. Let's open up my Arnold render view. And let's see what I'm working with here. Panels, perspective. Okay. And render, refresh render. Okay. This should make it do my render. There we go. Alright, so this is what we're getting. By default, you'll see that this line that you get on the light is quite crisp, and your shadows will be quite crisp as well. Here I'm going to take my resolution down by half so that you can get a better idea quicker of the kind of results that we are getting as I make these edits. But okay, so basically in order to get your shadows to be less crisp, then what you need to consider is this. In the Arnold section, there is both the radius and the lens radius. By default, they're both at 0, which is a light that would be infinitely small. There's no such thing as a light source that is infinitely small, so you're not going to get photorealistic results with them both at 0. So you would want to up your radius, and your lens radius should both give you results that would be more applicable. Hold on, let me just grab... Oh, I already had it open. Which you can see these changes in these numbers in the documentation, of course. Both the kind of results that you get by increasing your lens radius, or by increasing your radius. In any case, you'll see that this will give me softer shadows behind my T-can there, which is one thing that we're after. That gets us a little bit more realism. And then when it comes to this outer line, you won't necessarily get super photorealistic results, but what you can do is adjust the Penumbra Angle, which you can see how that functions probably best by selecting your spotlight and then again looking through selected, and as I adjust my Penumbra Angle, it will affect the fall off, which you can see that it will go in either direction, and it will be even all over. It will of course still get distorted by render, but you can see how that's sort of eased in there from either side with the addition of editing my Penumbra Angle. And similarly, if you want it to light a larger area, you can make your cone angle either very large or very small, and that will affect the area that you light with your spotlight. And then the last thing to go over, which I'll just set it back to the default of 40, that looked fine for what I was doing. And the last thing that I would want to go over here, as far as like basic attributes that you want to be aware of, is by default roundness will be at 1. If you want to affect these attributes but have them but produce a square light for one reason or another, you can in fact make the light square by reducing your roundness to 0. Okay, but alright, but instead of doing that, more so, what you would likely want to alter is you would want to use barn doors, which, if you've ever seen a spotlight, you've likely noticed that they often have flaps coming out the side, which are used to focus the light on a subject or to dynamically create some sort of lighting effect. And there are light filters for barn doors. The spotlight is a great opportunity to talk about light filters because the spotlight has basically the full array of light filters to be used, which again, as with anything, I always recommend looking at the documentation, especially when it comes to lighting, rendering, and building shaders. And you can see what we have here, but anyway, let's just apply some. So yeah, come down to the light filter section and I can add barn doors. And then I will have a new tab here in my attribute editor, and I can use them to dynamically shape my spotlight. Here, let me make this window a little smaller here, and let me see, I'll turn on my IPR, and alright, so I can start bringing in my left side, and you can see how I can adjust my edges there. I could bring in my right side, or pardon me, right, and I could more or less create the effect of light coming in through a doorway and hitting my T-can if I so desired. This isn't necessarily the best application of such a thing, but the power is there, and just as I adjust these various sliders, but the point being that you can shape your light and focus it the same exact way that you would shape that you can shape a real spotlight, and make these adjustments that can give you a lot of really dynamic lighting options really easily. Okay, so I mean, there isn't really too much more to be said about the barn doors light filter. It's really just the fact that you can have more control over your spotlight shape and from every direction in order to get whatever sort of dynamic, dramatic result that you would want. And if you're trying to emulate like a spotlight for a stage or for anything, then you can effectively get uh, like notes from a lighting director or something like that and apply that exact sort of real world lighting setup using the barn doors uh, and so on and so forth. For example, I have experience uh, uh, with setting up spotlights in theaters and like in the catwalks of like big theaters, and like I'd be up there moving the flaps or uh, so on and so forth. Anyway, moving along. So to get rid of it, I'll just disconnect it, and then that will return it to my normal spotlight shape. And let's keep going here. So next off, probably the most straightforward of all of these is the light light blocker, which it's not super useful, but what it'll do is it will make a transform, which you can see is right here at the origin, and I can scale it up, and basically whatever is inside this shape, which I can change it to be different shapes that I want to block light from, but uh, doesn't really matter for all intents and purposes. I will just use this here box, and whatever is inside the volume, light will be blocked from hitting it. Now, by default, you're not going to see much of any result. That's because by default the density is 0. But the higher you increase the density, the more light will be blocked out. You can still see that you get your global illumination. So if you want to get rid of that, you'll have to get rid of your bounces on your light. But having the global illumination there isn't necessarily a bad thing. This isn't a photorealistic light filter by any means, but it can help you get really creative with your lighting and achieve dramatic effects. And you can have fall off to it with which you can see happening here with this ramp, and you can see how you can bring it out with your edges as well. And if and there's roundness and so on. So like I said, not photorealistic, but if you want to block certain lights from entering certain areas, then this could be a way to do it. And at the very least, it can help you get creative with how, and you can like cut out shapes with them. So it's interesting, to say the least. Anyway, I'm going to now disconnect this, and I'll delete my light blocker transform. Okay, so moving along, something more useful, and something that can, in fact, add a little bit of realism, since a spotlight will keep going forever. It won't dim as you get further from the light, but you can add a light decay filter, and which is pretty straightforward in how it works. Basically, if I were to use far attenuation on, this is the distance from the light that it will start having fall off. So if I keep the far start at 0, that means as soon as light starts coming out of the spotlight, it will start falling off. But my far end is also at 0, which my light doesn't go that far out, but you can see that decay happening based off of the distance from my light, which, so I could get really dramatic lighting effects using this. And if I want to even fine tune that, then I could have it not start decaying until it hits a certain point, and then have that fall off happen rather rapidly from like one part to the next. And yeah, and then if you use near attenuation, it's basically fall off that's happening from the other direction, where the light will get dimmer as it gets closer to the source, which can help you fine tune a strip more or less, if that's the kind of thing you want to do, but likely it is not. But yeah, but it can still allow you to get creative and add different dramatic effects. So light filters, while they're not always photorealistic, it's the fact that the amount of control that they give you in getting creative with your lighting is really nice. And okay, that's all I'm going to go over with Decay. Not really too much to explain there. It's really just knowing how to adjust your sliders. And let's go back here. I'll disconnect the Decay filter. And lastly, what I will add is a Gobo. So a Gobo, what it is it is an image that you attach to your light, and it basically will use that light to dynamically adjust your lighting. You'll see. So with a slide map, that's where you're going to attach your image. So let's say I want to get like a factory sort of window lighting setup, but I don't want to model like a factory window to have light pass through. I can use a Gobo light filter to achieve that effect with just an image. And you can see by default that my light is still round, of course, but but as I mentioned earlier, I can always take that roundness out, and then I can get the sharper corners. Now you'll notice that like this shadow isn't really blending, so and you'll have to do that kind of blurring ahead of time if you want to soften your Gobo. But yeah, so I can get that factory window, light coming through a factory window going on, and so on. But it's also great for things like water caustics and things like that. So let me change out my Gobo to this water fractal. Now, this is a fractal texture that I made, which I was using more just to get rays of light, not necessarily accurately capture a water fractal. But you can see how that pattern can get projected. And hold on, actually, I'll just grab an image of water real quick to give you perhaps what would be a more satisfying result for you. Okay, so yeah, so I just grabbed this rather plain image of water, and I'll use this as a slide map instead. And render, refresh render. And you can see how I can get that sort of underwater like patterning on my T-can, like so. But all right. But I'm gonna circle back to using Gobos with volumetric lighting, which now I'm going to show you volumetric lighting. So let's go back to my spotlight shape, my Gobo. Yeah, I'll just disconnect it. And all right, so to set up volumetric lighting, it's pretty straightforward. So, you know, I got a render that's looking like this to start, which, you know, and I'll perhaps make this round again, like so. And to get it so you can have volumetric lighting, or like God rays, however you want to phrase it, it's pretty straightforward. You just go here into the Arnold Renderer tab of your render settings, and then I can go to Environment, and then here in Atmosphere, I can say Atmosphere, create an AI atmosphere volume. Now, by default, when you hit render, you will see no change. And the reason for that is that your density by default is at 0. So the more dense you make this, the more intense of a change you'll see. Obviously, that's too dense. I can go rather low indeed, it would seem. Which, you know what, let's change this to my perspective shape a second. And let's swing the camera around. And you can see those sorts of volumetric effects that we're getting. And which can get rather dramatic. But also, when it comes to these sorts of volumetric effects, and that's really all there is to it. I mean, you can up samples to reduce noise that you'll see happening in the fog or in the volume. But combine that with something like a Gobo, and you can get some really great effects. So like first I'll throw on each Gobo that I just showed you and show you the different kinds of effects that you can get. So, file. First I'll show you this one that didn't necessarily give us the greatest results for giving some sort of like rays filtering through water at first, but now that we have the volume in place, you can see the sort of breakup with the rays that I'm getting, and you can see how the and you can see how the T-can sort of blocks it and gives me different effects, and that's pretty nice. But let's try the window. And the different rays of light coming through the window. And let's just try the other water for fun as well. And refresh render. But yeah, all giving us really neat effects, which the one fractal that I made, the reason I made it, how I made it, was so that I could have light filtering down through And then, of course, you can always combine all of these different filters to get different effects. So, like, if I wanted to have decay on top of this sort of water patterning, I can do so. So, spotlight shape, add a filter, light decay, add, and if I go here, use far attenuation, and let's give it a little bit of something to start, and run IPR, and you can see that how the light decays from one end to the next, and achieve all sorts of different dramatic lighting effects. And to learn more, all you have to do, as always, is turn toward your documentation, which not only has more examples and more information on how to use all of these things, but it also comes free with tutorials on how to achieve different light scattering effects, how to animate them, and yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's pretty much all I have to go over. But yeah, that's the basics behind just adjusting various settings on your spotlight, uh, using each of the 4 kinds of light filters, and going over gobos and volumetric lighting. That's the basics of how you can get it done. So I hope that was helpful and educational, and goodbye.